What if you could map out all of human history, from the very first person, right up to today, using just one book? Well, today we're going to explore a really remarkable attempt to do exactly that. We're diving deep into a very specific, Bible-based chronology that charts a precise 6,000-year timeline for all of humanity.
And according to this very detailed calculation, the entire 6,000-year timeline pivots on one single year, 1873. Now, in this view, this isn't just some random date on the calendar. Nope, it's framed as a massive turning point in the entire story of the world.
Okay, so let's get right to the central claim. The idea is that 6,000 years of human history officially came to a close, and the seventh millennium began right in the autumn of AD 1873. That's a huge assertion, right? So let's see exactly how the author even begins to build this case. To build this timeline, the author starts with a really radical premise. You have to set aside all other historical records. We're talking secular history, geology, archaeology, the whole shebang. According to this view, they're all just too fragmented and unreliable to build a truly accurate chronology.
This shows a complete dismissal of geological dating. The author points to examples, like finding ancient bricks buried deep in the Nile silt, to argue that geologists make these wild assumptions about how long sediment layers take to form. They're basically accused of ignoring huge events like the biblical flood, or even simple physics, like a heavy brick sinking in mud. In the end, it's all waved away as just guessing.
And it isn't just geology. The author argues that even the histories of great empires we know, like Greece and Rome, become totally untrustworthy just a few thousand years back. They fade away into what's described as mythical or fabulous periods, lacking the solid, verifiable data you'd need for a precise timeline.
So this slide really lays out the stark contrast at the heart of the argument. On one side, you've got secular history, which is presented as this patchy, unreliable mess before about 776 BC. But on the other side, the Bible is presented as something entirely different, a complete, divinely provided chart tracing an unbroken line of history all the way back to the very first man, Adam. So, with all other sources set aside, the focus shifts entirely to the Bible. The author's goal now is to piece together a chronological chain, link by link, starting from the very first chapter of Genesis and moving forward.
And this here beautifully illustrates the major building blocks of that timeline. The author literally adds up the ages of the patriarchs in Genesis to get the time to the flood, then keeps moving through these key events. But what's really fascinating is that the author identifies two major gaps in the Old Testament's timeline and argues that they're actually bridged by specific statements made centuries later in the New Testament.
This table shows you the actual math. Each period is carefully calculated from specific scriptural references. And when you add it all up, from the creation of Adam all the way to the start of AD 1, you get a very precise total, 4,128 years.
Now, if you've ever looked at the margins of an old King James Bible, you might have seen a different chronology in there, one that was developed by Archbishop Ussher. So the obvious question is, why is this calculation different? What's going on here?
This table lays it out perfectly. The total difference between the two is 124 years, and it comes from a few key areas. The author argues Ussher started the 70-year desolation of Jerusalem 18 years too early and made some small errors in the reigns of a few kings. But the biggest difference, the real game changer, is that 100-year gap in the period of the judges.
And the explanation for that 100-year gap is pretty wild. The author suggests the entire discrepancy comes from a single verse, 1 Kings 6:1. And get this, they blame it on a simple scribe's error, basically a typo. The theory is that an ancient copyist mistook the Hebrew character for 5 for the very similar character for 4, which changed 580 years to 480 years and threw off all the other chronologies for centuries to come.
So this same kind of corrective lens is then applied to the starting point of our modern calendar, AD 1. The author argues that the date we commonly accept for the birth of Jesus is also incorrect, and that it needs to be recalculated using only scriptural evidence.
So, this leads us to a very direct and pretty compelling question. If that's the case, then when was Jesus actually born? Well, the author believes the Bible itself provides a clear, deductive path to the right answer.
And here's that logic broken down step by step. It all hinges on one verifiable date, the start of John the Baptist's ministry, which the Bible says was in the 15th year of Emperor Tiberius. We know that's AD 29. From there, you just work backward.
John had to be 30 to start his ministry, and we know Jesus was 6 months younger than him. You put it all together, and the author lands on a new birth date, October of BC 2.
And this brings us right back to where we started. With the timeline from Adam to AD 1 established as 4,128 years, and the AD calendar itself corrected, we can finally understand the massive prophetic significance the author puts on that year, 1873. See, to the author, the millennium wasn't just some vague term for the future. It was something very specific, the seventh 1,000-year period of human history. The thinking was, just like a week has 6 days of labor and a 7th day of rest, human history was structured the same way, with 6 1,000-year days of toil, followed by a 7th day of rest and divine rule. And here it is, the grand conclusion of this whole project. You add 1,872 years to that starting total of 4,128, and what do you get? Exactly 6,000. For the author, this meant that the autumn of 1872 marked the end of those 6,000 years, and that 1873 was the chronological beginning of the millennium.
It's so important to understand that this was never just an academic exercise in history. For the author, getting the chronology right was everything. It was the essential key to unlocking Bible prophecy. It was about creating a map of time to figure out exactly where humanity stood in the grand unfolding divine plan.
In the end, this entire intricate system of dates was a map of the past, created to define the present and even predict the future. And it leaves us with a much broader question to think about. How does any version of history, any map we draw of where we've been, inevitably shape our expectations for where we think we're going?